everyone. Happy Victober. I hope you are having a splendid, splendid month. And I am very much looking forward to recording this video. And I thought it would be fun to do a quiz type video. I have 20 first lines of Victorian literature for you, and I will read the first lines. Some of them are more paragraphs. They vary a little bit in length, but they're all from well-known Victorian novels. Some maybe slightly less known, but I don't think any that people out there haven't heard of. And I, though, thought I will kind of make it an even playing field, and that I have listed in the description down below, if you would like to look, I have listed in a random order for you the different books that are going to be featured. So if you would like, you could have the list handy. You can look at that. Maybe if you want to pause the video, get a pen and paper if you really want to go all out with this. And just let's get going. And I am looking forward to reading these quotes to you. So the first quote, the first opening line of a Victorian novel says, "Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I have been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. It was remarked that the clock began to strike, and I began to cry simultaneously." So, that line is from, and you want to pause if you don't want to know the answer right away. If you're still thinking about it, pause before I tell you the answer. That is the opening lines of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. That one I feel is a very iconic kind of opening. All right, the next one. "There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering, indeed, in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning. But since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. The cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so somber and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question." And those are the opening lines from Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I love how low-key those opening lines are. The next one. "Every town-bred person who travels in a rich country region knows what it is to see a neat white house planted in a pretty situation, in a shrubbery, or commanding a sunny common, or nestling between two hills, and to say to himself, as the carriage sweeps past its gate, 'I should like to live there. I could be very happy in that pretty place.' Transient visions pass before his mind's eye of dewy summer mornings when the shadows are long on the grass, and of bright autumn afternoons when it would be luxury to saunter in the neighboring lanes, and of frosty winter days when the sun shines in over the laurestinus at the window, while the fire burns with a different light from that which gives it in the dull parlors of a city." Those are the opening lines of Deerbrook by Harriet Martineau. Number 4. I think many people will get this one. "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only." Those are the opening lines of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. The next quote. "3rd of May, Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place, from the glimpse which I got of it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late and would start as near the correct time as possible." And those are the opening lines of Dracula by Bram Stoker. Number 6. "This is the story of what a woman's patience can endure and what a man's resolution can achieve." That is the opening line of The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Number 7. 1801. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with. This is certainly a beautiful country. In all England, I do not believe that I could have fixed on a situation so completely removed from the stir of society. And that is from Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Number 8, kind of a longer, meandering opening here. London. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth, and it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle, with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes, gone into mourning. One might imagine, for the death of the sun. Dogs indistinguishable in mire. Horses, scarcely better, splashed to their very blinkers. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general infection of ill temper and losing their foothold at street corners, where tens of thousands of other foot passengers have been slipping and sliding since the day broke, if this day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement, and accumulating at compound interest. And that is the opening section of Bleak House by Charles Dickens, and very meandering it is. All right, the 9th opening passage. We settle down in our new home, and I resolve to keep a diary. Tradesmen trouble us a bit, so does the scraper. The curate calls and pays me a great compliment. That is from the opening of Diary of a Nobody. Number 10. Let the reader be introduced to Lady Carberry, upon whose character and doings much will depend of whatever interest these pages may have, as she sits at her writing table in her own room in her own house in Welbeck Street. Lady Carberry spent many hours at her desk and wrote many letters, wrote also very much beside letters. She spoke of herself in these days as a woman devoted to literature, always spelling the word with a big L. Something of the nature of her devotion may be learned by the perusal of 3 letters which on this morning she had written with a quickly running hand. Lady Carberry was rapid in everything, and in nothing more rapid than in the writing of letters. Here is letter number 1. And that is the opening of The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Number 11. This is the story of the different ways we looked for treasure, and I think when you have read it, you will see that we were not lazy about the looking. Such a charming opening to The Story of the Treasure Seekers by E. Nesbit. All right, this one has some names in it, so you might find those helpful. Edith, said Margaret gently, Edith. But as Margaret half suspected, Edith had fallen asleep. She lay curled up on the sofa in the back drawing room in Harley Street, looking very lovely in her white muslin and blue ribbons. If Titania had ever been dressed in white muslin and blue ribbons, and had fallen asleep on a crimson damask sofa in a back drawing room, Edith might have been taken for her. Margaret was struck afresh by her cousin's beauty. They had grown up together from childhood, and all along Edith had been remarked upon by everyone except Margaret for her prettiness. But Margaret had never thought about it until the last few days, when the prospect of soon losing her companion seemed to give force to every sweet quality and charm which Edith possessed. And that is the opening of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. Number 13. The studio was filled with the rich odor of roses, and when the light summer wind stirred amidst the trees of the garden, there came through the open door the heavy scent of the lilac, or the more delicate perfume of the pink flowering thorn. And that is the opening of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. The next one, 14. In an easy chair of the spacious and handsome library of his townhouse sat William, Earl of Mount Severn. His hair was gray, the smoothness of his expansive brow was defaced by premature wrinkles, and his once attractive face bore the pale, unmistakable look of dissipation. One of his feet was cased in folds of linen as it rested on the soft velvet ottoman, speaking of gout as plainly as any foot ever spoke. It would seem, to look at the man as he had sat there, that he had grown old before his time. And so he had. His years were barely 49, yet in all save years he was an aged man. That is from East Lynne by Ellen Wood. Number 15. With a single drop of ink for a mirror, the Egyptian sorcerer undertakes to reveal to any chance comer far-reaching visions of the past. This is what I undertake to do for you, reader. With this drop of ink at the end of my pen, I will show you the roomy workshop of Mr. Jonathan Burge, carpenter and builder in the village of Hayslope, as it appeared on the 18th of June in the year of our Lord, 1799. And that is from Adam Bede by George Eliot. Number 16. The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. Some shady trees leaned over it, and rushes and water lilies grew at the deep end. Over the hedge on one side we looked into a ploughed field, and on the other we looked over a gate at our master's house, which stood by the roadside. At the top of the meadow was a grove of fir trees, and at the bottom a running brook overhung by a steep bank. Those are the opening lines of Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, I think is the author's name, and that's one I'm hoping I will have read this Victober. Number 17. Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile, cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean, long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something eminently human beaconed from his eye, something indeed which never found its way into his talk, but which spoke not only in the silent symbols of the after-dinner face, but more often and loudly in the acts of his life. He was austere with himself, drank gin when he was alone, to mortify a taste for vintages, and though he enjoyed the theatre, had not crossed the doors of one for 20 years. But he had an approved tolerance for others, sometimes wondering, almost with envy, at the high pressure of spirits involved in their misdeeds, and in any extremity inclined to help rather than to reprove. I incline to Cain's heresy, he used to say quaintly. I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. In this character, it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of down-going men. And to such as these, so long as they came about his chambers, he never marked a shade of change in his demeanor. Those are the opening lines of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. All right, the 18th passage. On an evening in the latter part of May, a middle-aged man was walking homeward from Shaston to the village of Marlott and the adjoining vale of Blakemore or Blackmore. The pair of legs that carried him were rickety, and there was a bias in his gait, which inclined him somewhat to the left of a straight line. He occasionally gave a smart nod, as if in confirmation of some opinion, though he was not thinking of anything in particular. An empty egg basket was slung upon his arm, the nap of his hat was ruffled, a patch being quite worn away at its brim where his thumb came in taking it off. Presently he was met by an elderly parson, astride on a grey mare, who, as he rode, hummed a wandering tune. And those are the opening lines of Tess of the Derbybills by Thomas Hardy. Number 19. This one is very unique, so I think it should stick out. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own, that as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the infusoria under the microscope do the same. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. And that is from The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. All right, last quote, last passage. Number 20. You must go back with me to the autumn of 1827. My father, as you know, was a sort of gentleman farmer in Blankshire, and I, by his express desire, succeeded him in the same quiet occupation. not very willingly, for ambition urged me to higher aims, and self-conceit assured me that in disregarding its voice, I was burying my talent in the earth and hiding my light under a bushel. My mother had done her utmost to persuade me that I was capable of great achievements, but my father, who thought ambition was the surest road to ruin, and change but another word for destruction, would listen to no scheme for bettering either my own condition or that of my fellow mortals. He assured me it was all rubbish, and exhorted me, with his dying breath, to continue in the good old way, to follow his steps, and those of his father before him, and let my highest ambition be to walk honestly through the world, looking neither to the right hand nor to the left, and to transmit the paternal acres to my children in at least as flourishing a condition as he left them to me. Those are the opening lines of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. I hope that you had fun with this quiz. Let me know what your score was, and maybe I'll make another one of these videos if people enjoyed it. And have a splendid, very festive feeling Victober, and I will be back with another video soon. Bye.